Hello and welcome to this week's What Would You Do presentation. It comes from Chapter 6, Intellectual Property. My name's Brandon Delaney and I'm at National University. And this is CSC350 Computer Ethics. So the scenario this week, basically you're a student and you've procrastinated for way too long, and now you come down to the final 5 days in which your final exam for your modern Middle Eastern history course is due, and it's a paper that's probably going to take you about 20 hours to research and write, and you just don't have the time because you have 3 other final exams that you have to study for, and you have a roommate who's an English major from Saudi Arabia who is a 3.8 GPA who just happens to know the modern Middle Eastern history pretty well, and he suggested that he'd write a paper for you for $100, or he'd show you some websites that you can download one. You're not really sure what you should do because you have to study for the other exams, obviously. Basically, you have to decide whether or not you want to pay him or study for the other exams. So the problem statement in this scenario is pretty much you procrastinated for way too long, and now you have to decide to pay for a written paper or just go ahead and bite the bullet and write it as best you can while trying to balance the studying for your other exams at the same time. So as Reynolds suggests in the book, step one in this kind of situation would to be identifying alternatives. The first alternative, so all of the alternatives would be to enlist help from others, but that's kind of broad. But the first one would be to ask for assistance on the written paper, but don't pay but don't pay someone for the whole thing. Number two would be to do as much as research as you can, write it as well as you can at the given time you have remaining, but have balance between the paper and other exams. Number three would be to study as much as you can for the final exams and let the paper become less significant, but still kind of just write it as best you can. And then the fourth one would be to skip the paper entirely and dedicate all your time to the other exams. So the next step in the decision-making process would be to evaluate and choose the alternative. So number one, as mentioned, would be to ask for assistance on the written paper, but don't pay someone for the whole thing. So this kind of means just to ask your friends or ask your students that are maybe in your class, or ask the teacher maybe for some help, or anyone that's kind of has experience in the given subject, and kind of enlist help from them, and see if they have any insight on the subject, and as well as doing research to go ahead and write the whole thing. So continuing on, number two, do as much research and write it as well as you can in the given time you have remaining, but also have balance between the paper and the other exams. So given that you only have about 5 days left, this would mean to kind of balance the whole project between the paper and then the 3 other exams between all 5 days. So don't dedicate all your time to one, and don't dedicate less time to another. I mean, all of them are important because you want to pass every single class and you want to get the best grade you can, but you want to have balance. So you don't want to, unless you're failing one of the classes, or you need the best grade you can get in one of the classes, which there's not that really mentioned in the actual scenario. That would be the only situation where you want to dedicate more time to one. But in this situation, it would be to dedicate as much balance as you can between all the exams and the studying. So number three would be to study as much as you can for the other final exams and let the paper become less significant, but still write it. In this situation, you may have a higher grade in the class in which you need the paper to be written, and then in the other classes you might have lower grades, so you need to study for those better. This is kind of subjective to the person and the specific scenario, but it depends on your grades and everything that correlates to each class. In this situation, also, letting the paper become less significant, that doesn't necessarily mean it's less important. but it just doesn't take as much as the time that you were planning to dedicate to it. So you'd be spending more time on the other 3 exams and studying for those, rather than taking the time to write that paper, I guess, as best as you can. So the final option or alternative would be to skip the paper entirely and dedicate all of your time to the other exams. So in this particular decision, you might have an A in that class already, the class that you need to write the paper in, and all the other classes you're kind of on the cusp where you need to get a B or a C or maybe even an A, and you kind of just need to dedicate all your time to that particular course. And I mean, I don't suggest that you skip any paper, but if the time comes down to it and you've already procrastinated long enough and you don't have the time to finish it and you're too stressed out to get the other ones done as well, this is an alternative that some people may choose to go down. So the next step in Reynolds' decision-making process would be to actually implement the decision. So after much deliberation and enlisting help from others and going through all the different scenarios and processes, you decided to do as much research as you can and kind of just write it as well as you can given the time you have left, while still trying to balance all your studying between all the exams you have left. So the final step in Reynolds' decision-making process would to be actually evaluating the results after you make the decision. So after deciding not to pay your roommate or to buy a paper online, maybe you didn't receive the grades you were hoping for, but you realized that it was actually the most ethical decision overall, and you actually you realized that how important it was to get your work done on time and not to procrastinate as much, and you actually probably realized that your even though your roommate's extremely intelligent and smart and with that 3.8 GPA, and he can kind of skate his way through school because he's pretty smart, he may not be as ethical as you are when he's making decisions, and if he's willing to take money to do your work, it's he may not be the most ethical decision maker. So this is the reference I used to put this PowerPoint together, and it's the book Ethics in Information Technology, written by George Reynolds.